and welcome to Global News Today on Al Arabiya English with me, your host, Michal Prendergast. And today, we focus on the crisis in Gaza and the rising calls for a two-state solution. And later, we shift to Europe's trade tensions with the US, examining the recent deals, the political fallout, and what lies ahead. To kick off the show, the eyes of the world are on Gaza, and calls for a two-state solution have never been louder. Well, joining me for more on this is Yossi Beilin, the former Israeli Justice Minister and architect of the Oslo Accords, to discuss a potential two-state solution in Gaza. Thanks so much for your time, Yossi. I'd like to start off by asking, do you still believe in a two-state solution?
Yes, I think that there is no other solution for the two peoples. For the Palestinians, it is the fulfillment of their right for self-determination. For us, it is something which assures that Israel prevails a Jewish and democratic state. So the need for a two-state solution has not changed. And I didn't hear another idea for a solution between us.
Has Benjamin Netanyahu and the Israeli government, have they abandoned the notion of a two-state solution now?
Netanyahu personally, as you know, supported the two-state solution, even delivered speeches in the UN Assembly General supporting the two-state solution, changed his mind, and he is leading a very rightist government. And he is speaking against the two-state solution now. The question is whether it is only a political situation or whether he changed his heart. I don't know.
And for some of our younger viewers, is this the darkest chapter in the history of the Israel and Palestine conflict?
Well, I think that it's a very big crisis. But it's very important to draw the line between Palestinians and Palestinians. Netanyahu, since October 7th, is saying all the time there is no difference between the Palestinian Authority and Hamas. And of course, he's totally wrong. I presume that even he understands it. And no, we have an address. And the address for Israel is the PLO. We signed the agreements with the PLO, and we will sign the future agreements with the PLO, whose legitimate daughter is the Palestinian Authority. So the distinction between the Ramallah and Gaza, or more accurately, between the PLO and the Hamas, is vital for the achievement of a solution, for those who want a solution and who believe in a solution.
And with your vast experience in these matters, what is your opinion on the path forward for peace talks?
Well, the question is whether this Israeli government is going to continue. On the Palestinian side, you have a weak government, and Mahmoud Abbas, the president, is not becoming younger, unlike all of us. But he is a man of peace, and he is committed to peace. And if in Israel there is a government which is committed to peace too, I think that there won't be a difficulty to have an agreement between the two peoples, since we know the solutions by now. After 30 years of formal and informal negotiations, we know more or less what each side is ready to compromise on, and we will not need too much time in order to achieve peace between the parties. If there are governments which are just playing games in order not to achieve peace, because they believe that the land is there given to them by God, or whatever. And you have these people, as you know, in our part of the world, who believe that it is a God-given land. And, you know, with God-given land, you don't compromise and you cannot convince anybody.
What do you say to those
not the-
people? If I may just interrupt, what do you say to those people?
I cannot argue with God. If they tell me that it was given by God, I cannot prove to them that they are wrong. So the truth is that I gave up on arguing with these people, because this is the last resort. I mean, what can I say as a secular person or a pragmatic person to somebody who believes that God gave it to them? Thanks heaven, it is not the majority. I mean, for sure, not on the Israeli side. It is a small minority. Even religious people, not all of them believe that it is a God-given, and they are ready to compromise. But there are extreme people today on our government. It is for the first time in our history that these people are playing a role in any government. And it's really bad news. It is bad news because they are determined, they are sure that they are right, and God is on their side.
There's an enormous amount of public pressure from within Israel and outside. Do you think this public pressure is able to revive diplomacy?
Yes, I don't think that anybody is immune of pressure. The pressure inside Israel is the protests and the public opinion polls. You see, in all the public opinion polls for the last, I don't know, more than a year, are supporting the end of the war in order to release all the hostages. With such numbers, a democracy cannot easily argue. And you have a world which at the beginning, after October 7th, was very supportive of Israel, and they had empathy for Israel. But very soon, our retaliation became a reason, a good enough reason for them to make Israel the villain of this story. And all these things are having an impact. You see that Netanyahu already said that from now on he's going to support an agreement which will end the war and release all the hostages in one time. And this is a change, a huge change in his policy, I presume, as a result of what is happening.
We've seen a lot of criticism around the world in regards to the settlements. Do these settlements make the two-state solution impossible?
No. If you ask the settlers, they will say yes. We won. From now on, there will be no peace because we built so many settlements that you cannot draw a border. My answer is very different, and I'll tell you why. Ms. Hiba Husseini and myself have published a book about the Confederation, the Holy Land Confederation, in which there will be an umbrella of a confederation on Israel and on Palestine, on two independent and sovereign states. Now, all the settlers, the Israeli settlers, who will find themselves in the future of a Palestinian state as a result of a border which will be drawn by that, will be allowed to remain where they are, or to go back to Israel and to get compensation. There will be no need to evacuate them. And evacuating hundreds of thousands of settlers is the biggest, I would say, obstacle and fear of the Israeli pragmatic leaders. So if we solve this problem, that under the structure of a confederation, everybody can remain where they are, where he or she is, I think that we are removing the biggest problem on the agenda, as you referred to, and this is the settlements.
And turning to Gaza now, is Israel doing enough to prevent the suffering in Gaza?
I hope that now it is doing much more. It did not do enough beforehand. And again, the cry in the world is doing something. Israel is not God forbid, North Korea or something like that. I mean, we live in the world and we are part of the club, and we don't want to be out of this club. And we understand that although it was not done intentionally, and although the beginning of the whole story is the massacre of October 7th, but the reality on the ground is that we are there, Israel is there in the Gaza Strip, it is dominating the Gaza Strip, and people are suffering a lot. And we cannot run away from this fact, even if we are not to be blamed for the intentions against these people. Now, I think that there is a different policy today, that people are having the opportunity to have food in different places in Gaza, and the situation is better.
Turning back to October 7th, the main question at the time was, is Israel's response, is it proportional? In your mind now, with 2020 hindsight, was it proportional?
Nothing could be proportional. I mean, if they cut the organs of babies, we should cut the same number of organs on the Palestinian side. It is not a normal war, if there are normal wars. It is something very different, out of this world, a kind of a bad movie. And the immediate reaction was to send the troops to the Gaza Strip. As I said, I mean, the numbers are talking for themselves, and the number of the people who were killed there, people who are not part of the war, were non-involved in the war, these numbers are very, very high, and we cannot ignore it.
This may lead to, as well, we're seeing huge amounts of protests in Israel. Why do you think so many people are protesting against Benjamin Netanyahu? Is Israeli democracy at stake?
Well, I would say that Israel's democracy is in a crisis. It will not disappear. And there are enough people who will fight and sacrifice even their life in order to assure that Israel is still a democracy. But it is less obvious than before. Even today, the government is debating the idea of firing the Attorney General, which is very, very problematic. Very problematic. She is the one who is, in many ways, is the boy in the dam, in the Dutch dam, which is preventing a flood. And so you are finding me in a very difficult day. Still, I think that Israel is quite a veteran democracy of 77 years. It has its institutions, which were not built yesterday. And even though we are in a crisis, as I said, mainly because of the people whom Benjamin Netanyahu added to his coalition, because otherwise he would not have a majority. Still, I think that they are not able to destroy our democracy, but they are causing very big damages to the Israeli society and to the Israeli democracy, no doubt.
And as you said, Israeli democracy is in a crisis. Is this a turning point in the long-term future of Israel?
We need more time to look back and to say what was the turning point. Usually, you say, today it is a turning point, but today is the perspective is too short. So we need more time to understand exactly. Yes, we need more time to understand what was it, the October the 7th. It is still, we are still living under the shock of October 7th. And the emergency and the losses and the role of the army and many other questions which are there. So we need more time. But I think that it is a very challenging period. There is no question, no question.
And what's your message to any young Israelis who are losing faith in the system there?
Yeah, but they are not giving up on Israel, and they are they see the system. They understand that there should be tools in order to repair it, and they should believe in Israel. Israel has a role in this world as a Jewish state, and the role is not wars, and the role is not cruelty, and the role is not hunger. The role is to make this world a little bit better with the values that we are having and that we would like to share with our friends.
Do Oslo and Geneva, do they still offer a blueprint for the future of Israel and Palestine, or are they part of the past?
Well, you're speaking about things which were signed 20 or 30 years ago, and they need to be updated. My contribution to this is what I referred to before, the idea of a confederation. When I began the Oslo process, I did not even think about a possibility of a confederation, and neither when we signed the Geneva Initiative in 2003. Today, I don't believe that we can achieve the aim of a two-state solution, which, as I said, is the only solution. There is no other solution, neither for the Palestinians nor for us. So I see this as a potential solution. And it may be either a dual confederation with the Palestinians and the Israelis, and even open to other members, like first and foremost Jordan itself, if it wishes so.
Dr. Yossi Beilin, thank you so much for your time and insights.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Pascal, thanks so much for your time. Why is Ursula von der Leyen's deal at the golf course in Scotland, it's been called a humiliation for Europe? Why is that?
Well, I think you're right. The announcement of this so-called deal between Mr. Trump and Mrs. von der Leyen has been quite heavily criticized so far in Europe. I think the expectations were that Europe would resist more, a bit like China, to sort of unilaterally imposed tariffs by Mr. Trump. So the good question, I think, is why did the European Union not strike back earlier in threatening Trump with EU countervailing tariffs the way China did it? By the way, China was the only one to do it so far. And I think the explanation to this lies in two reasons, which is the ones the Commission has been advocating in support of the position Mrs. von der Leyen took. The first one is that nobody among the EU member states or in EU business was really pushing for a strong retaliation, credible threat against the US. The reality, I think, is that nobody was in favor of an escalation that would have led to a tit-for-tat trade war between US and EU. And the second reason, which has nothing to do with tariffs or trade or economics, is just that the EU believes that the main threat from the US would not come from tariffs, but from pulling away from Ukraine. Ukraine is for the EU a more important question than a few percentages of market share in the US. It's a much more existential issue for EU than trade. The priority of the European Union today is to keep the US engaged in the defense of Ukraine. And the fear probably was among EU leaders and at the European Commission that if EU would strike back, then Trump's, whose position on Ukraine and Russia has been, let's say, changing from time to time, could have changed to a retreat, which would have been catastrophic for the European Union. So it's a mix of economic consideration, no taste for a full-fledged tit-for-tat trade war, and a more serious, in my view, major geopolitical issue.
Is it a case of appeasement? Is Ursula von der Leyen essentially now a Neville Chamberlain in a confrontation with Donald Trump?
Well, only, that's a very good question. Only the future will say whether on this front, and this is one of the many fronts of a transatlantic, very complex and multidimensional relationship, whether on this front and on others, Trump has been sort of appeased and will move to other topics. Now, one can doubt about this, A, because he himself predicts to be transactional, unpredictable, changing position, like a boxer. Second, there are other areas like digital regulation, for instance, or financial regulation, where the US could take measures, or the EU could take measures that would destabilize further this relationship. And then, of course, we're always left with this question of whether the NATO Article 5, which says that the US will protect Europe in case of the Russian aggression, still stands valid, which is, in my view, a very important question mark for the European Union.
My next question is, could anyone else have done a better job against Donald Trump?
Well, what we've seen so far is that the range of these unilateral tariffs, which take the shape of a sort of deal, although a deal under such stretch conditions is a bit like it's a mafia extortion exercise. Huh? I have a big gun. I'll hit you if you don't pay. I don't call this a negotiation, but let's leave that aside. The tariffs range from 10%, which is the UK benchmark, to 50%, which is the Brazil or Chinese one. And even the UK had to pay 10%, whereas they have a trade deficit vis-à-vis the US. So the UK, who has theoretically not a problem, because the problem for Trump is the trade imbalance between the US and third countries, which he believes, which is not my view, is a big problem for the US. Even the UK, who has no trade problem, has been hit with a 10%. So in a way, an EU 15%, given the size of the EU economy, if that's it for the moment, with a bit of sweeteners or waivers or adds up here and there, you buy a bit more of energy, a bit more of weapons, or you have 0 for 0 in some specific tariffs. I mean, seen as compared to the rest of the world, may seem like a relatively good trade position, although it clearly puts the EU in a position of inferiority. the EU in agreeing to this 15% tariff in a way validates the notion that the US trade deficit is a problem, that coercion from the US can work, and that its power as a bloc, which was meant to be a very big one on trade, and I know it was a very good one because I was trade commissioner a long time ago, when geostrategic questions, when the rule of force substitutes the rule of law, then the EU as a bloc is weaker. Certainly that some would have expected, including within the EU, and that probably means that we will have a reaction by EU public opinion that probably will push for more rapid, more complete integration of EU, not just economically, but politically, including in areas like defense, where for the moment, the EU has remained very weak.
If you were still in post, what would be your advice to Ursula von der Leyen?
I think, first, I would say, on the trade side, look for trade diversification. So try to open more trade with major trade partners, China, the Mercosur, Brazil, Argentina, and the like, the Gulf countries, Southeast Asia, Indonesia, big shots, in order to compensate for the loss of market share in the US. And second, apply the recommendations of Mario Draghi and Enrico Letta, who have proposed a sort of plan to redynamize, remake the EU economy more competitive, because there's nothing like international power without a solid economy. And for the moment, the potential growth of the EU economy is lower than US, lower than China, lower than India. And third, push more quickly for an integration of EU defense industry in order to grow the military capacity of the European Union as a whole, not so much in investing more money in defense, but in getting more value for the money they spend. And it's likely that if the EU defense industry was integrated the way other industries are integrated, governments and the EU, mostly governments given where the treaties are for the moment, would pay 30% less for the weapons they buy. So there's a lot of integration on the industrial side, which still remains to be done. So that would be roughly the sort of off-the-cuff 3 recommendations I would make.
Ursula von der Leyen was a close ally of Joe Biden. Do you think this has come back to haunt her and the EU now that Donald Trump is in the White House?
There's certainly an element of that. And if you believe the words of Mr. Trump, which I don't think we should always do, but sometimes do, and making the difference is a risky exercise. The reality is that Mr. Trump has several times said that he disliked the European Union. He said that the EU is worse for the US than China. He once said that the EU was set up after the Second World War to screw up the United States of America, which in my view makes absolutely no sense, but he has a really antagonistic attitude vis-à-vis the European Union. And I think the reason for that, fundamentally, is that he would prefer to have 27 smaller or medium-sized member states to deal with. And in this sort of relationship, he believes his leverage, his capacity to arm twist for the moment third countries would be higher. in a way, EU as a whole, although it had to accept for the moment this unbalanced deal, is probably a better deal at EU level than what would have had our member states individually, starting, for instance, with Germany, who has a very large industrial surplus vis-à-vis the United States of America.
Should Europe walk away from this deal?
I don't think so. The EU has a reputation for being driven by law, by stability, by predictability. The EU has a reputation for being a trusted international partner. It certainly has not shown that it is a strong international partner, but I think it remains a trusted international trade partner. And insofar as other third countries than the US are interested, and many of them are, to accede to the EU market, which is the largest and the deepest today in the world. We are less rich than the US, but we are more consumers, and we are much less consumers than China, but we are much richer. So far, the EU internal market remains an extremely attractive market. And if the notion that the EU can be trusted in its international relationships, then this can be an asset in diversifying trade relations from the US to other growing and emerging countries.
Just going back to one of your points on EU growth, it's somewhat stagnated over the past few years. It perhaps harkens back to the 70s where stagflation reigned. With the current inflation, is there fear that Trump's tariffs, that they could trigger a recession?
I think conventional wisdom among the economists is that Trump tariffs will cost roughly 1% to the US economy, which is a lot, plus, of course, a bit of inflation, and that the impact of these 15% tariff fence around the US would be on 25 and 26, roughly 0.5% of EU growth. So this is not as much as in the US. It's not. The US consumers and the US importers will pay the price for tariffs, as we all know, depending on how much of this is fueled at the end of the day to the consumer and how much is retained by intermediaries on the value chain who, for instance, would eat on their margins or on their market share. So the main negative economic consequences will be on the US, but there will be, given the high trade dependence of the EU, there will be a negative impact, let's say, again, total over 25 and 26 of roughly 0.5% for GDP, which does not put the EU into recession, but which eats into an already relatively low growth potential, which is why, as I mentioned, one of the priorities should be to increase the EU growth potential, and in order to do that, to integrate more the EU economies, and as Mr. Draghi and Mr. Letta have shown, there's a lot of reserves of growth in integrating further the EU market, whether in goods and mostly in services, who at this stage, and many years after Jacques Delors, who was my mentor, launched the internal market in 1985, the services markets in the EU are not yet integrated to their full potential, which means that there is a potential reserve of growth and efficiency which needs to be tapped in the future.
And how has the global economy reacted so far?
I think the markets give you the answer to your question. Contrary to some expectations, markets, apart from the April shock, which was an announcement to which they reacted very negatively, since then, markets have remained relatively calm. Of course, in recent days, there has been a bit of downside trend, but nothing of the order of a shock. So, if markets are right, which they often, not always are, they believe, as I do, by the way, that this is certainly a breach by the US of the previous international rules-based trading system, but this is not a large crisis of the international trading system. After all, the US are 13%, 13% of world imports. If anything, with these tariffs, this import proportion of world imports will decrease. And if the remaining 87 or more on the rest of the world remain cool-headed and do not indulge in this sort of protectionist fever which the US have contracted, as they did it, by the way, already 2 times at the end of the 19th century and in the middle in the 1930s, then if the rest of the world behaves, this is not a world trading system shock. It is a bilateral problem between the US and its trade partners. It is not a worldwide large trade crisis. Value chains in market capitalism will adjust to this sort of 15% trade-weighted tariff fence around the US, as they do when they adjust to the minimum wage in China or to the price of oil.
We're just out of time, Pascal. Thanks so much for your time. That's all we have time for on Global News today. Thanks for watching and be sure to join us tomorrow for more exclusive interviews. Until then, goodbye.